Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's AIA Members Only session, Act Now, Permit Streamlining, Resources and Strategy to Advocate for Local Reform. As you get settled, please feel free to say hello and where you're joining from in the chat today. And also, please remember to mute yourselves upon joining today's session. To qualify for continuing education credit, AIA California provides the learning objectives for every webinar and includes them in the presentation and resources that can be made available. A few quick housekeeping reminders. Today's session is being recorded and qualifies for 1.5 AIA learning units. For those who stay on and watch live, AIA California staff will report these units to AIA for you and will send follow-up information on how you can request a certificate of completion. There will be a Q&A session towards the end where attendees can raise hands and unmute themselves to ask questions. Please be constructive in your comments and questions to help foster a positive learning experience for everyone. AIA California wants to help foster discussions on permit streamlining and believes peer-to-peer networking and collaboration is key. To continue these important discussions with hopes of bringing improvements to jurisdictions across the state, AIA California has created a permit streamline network on our Basecamp. For those who do not know, Basecamp is an online collaboration platform that allows members to communicate and share resources effectively and easily. Members can post messages and share information directly from Basecamp online or straight from your email. Members can customize their notification experience with options ranging from individual post notifications to closely track conversations or action items, or to daily or weekly summaries to follow discussions from a higher level. If you're interested in joining the Permit Streamline Network on Basecamp, we'll provide an opportunity later in today's session and in our follow-up email for you to confirm your interest and we can get you added. I'd now like to hand it over to our speaker for today, Michael Malinowski, FAIA. Handing it over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you all for taking time from your busy days. I'm sure every one of you on this call has a big pile of things demanding your immediate attention on your desk. So carving time out to join us today is much appreciated and acknowledged. Those of you who know me know that I'm a man of many hats, both literally and figuratively. And today I'm wearing the hat of a architect interested in permit streamlining going back 3 decades. I've actually served as a consultant in jurisdictions and spoken on permit streamlining around the country, launched streamlining programs, been paid to come in and evaluate permit processing in different jurisdictions, have a current permit streamlining program that I helped create and manage in Northern California that is probably one of the widest used programs. It's only in Northern California, but it's 19 jurisdictions. And that's, from that perspective, that's one of the reasons why I volunteered to do this program. I start with this slide, not because it's of relevance specifically to California, but it's relevance to my story, which is part of what I'm sharing with you today. When I joined the AI National Board of Directors, gosh, that's probably now 15 years ago almost, I was already really active in permit streamlining, and I used that position to try and encourage others and to try and encourage AI nationally to get re-engaged, because there had been a period where they were pretty active in permit streamlining. In fact, they commissioned a national study by Price Cooper's Waterhouse. Some of you may have seen that documented some of the advantages to communities that have permit streamlining. But anyway, one of the assumptions I didn't realize that I had made was that every architect had the same perspective about permit streamlining, that it was positive. And I did these 2 interviews because I was wrong about that. You have here 2 gentlemen that I met, one from Oregon, one from Arkansas, who are describing what from a 20,000-foot level looks similar. A person walking into a building department and a few hours later walking out with a building permit. Bill Sider was describing how he handles TI permits in, I think he was talking about Portland. Thad Kelly was talking about jurisdictions in Arkansas that are small, where the same set of plans can be used over and over by a contractor, unupdated. They just grab out a dusty old set of plans, they walk in and walk out with a permit. That's perspective on permit streamlining was different than Bill's. He was generally not supportive if it resulted in people being able to reuse plans that were obsolete. So I only share that because there are so many different perspectives and opinions that it's important to step back and try and understand who all is part of the conversation and what their perspective is. It is important also to realize that permit processing can be streamlined without disregarding or diminishing protection of the public health, safety, and welfare. Everybody on this call probably has a pretty good idea of what the benefits are of permit streamlining, both to us as architects, but also to the community as a whole and to the local government when it's done well. It does require engagement by architects because we are part of the process, whether we want to be or not. And because permits are always local, uh, we do not have a state building. We do have a state building code, but we do not have a state code official. There is a local uh, orientation to most permit streamlining, not all, but most. Sometimes programs become so successful, and an example is the self-certification program that originated in Phoenix, and the local chapter there played a big role in that. That has spread to a whole region around all the cities. As you know, Phoenix is a metroplex with many cities that surround it. Uh, but there are also streamlining driven by legislation, and that is increasingly becoming the case in California. Attempts to mandate timelines. There is an existing law that mandates local jurisdictions have a checklist. There are other examples you can find, like Florida has a right for architects to require the use of outside plan reviewers in the state of Florida. I know that's come up in California as a possibility. But whenever I look at activity across the country, I find it's pretty often that AI components have a role. AI National actually issued this report, gosh, it's almost a decade ago now, a vision for the future of that intersection between architects and codes and regulatory review. And this is really an important tool to use as a reference to what are we talking about as a profession when we talk about the future of permits, permit reviews, and permit processing. One of the core principles here that has actually come really to the forefront recently is a different, more holistic view of what does HSW even mean, health, safety, and welfare. The original code perspective and one shared by still some building officials is that health, safety, welfare is really about keeping buildings from falling down, keeping exit pathways so people can exit a building in the event of an emergency like a fire. But in our world as architects, we know that HSW has grown exponentially. It deals with accessibility, it deals with water conservation, it deals with energy use. It really has become a huge umbrella, and we believe that's consistent with our mission as a profession to engage in being custodians, not just of our customers' interest and benefits, but of the community as a whole. Some myths are common about permit streamlining. One is that permit streamlining is always local. It is usually implemented locally, but as I noted earlier, some streamlining programs actually end up spreading because they create a competitive advantage for a particular community. Some people think that streamlining is about asking people in the jurisdiction to work harder or faster, skipping steps, and in fact, the best and the most permit streamlining programs do not skip key steps that would compromise the bottom line objective of protecting HSW. It also doesn't mean some people in the public think when you talk about streamlining, that means you're just going to be handing out permits like candy to anyone who asks for one. And we all know that that is not the case. And in fact, it's really about finding out what the answer is when you're talking especially about a ministerial process. Is it yes, we approve, or no? And that's what we want to get to, that answer as quickly as possible to find out if there are issues. Some believe that the best practices in streamlining are universal, and that is not, in my experience, what the reality is. It varies dramatically in different jurisdictions, in different areas, even in different time frames. Some believe that self-certification has a poor track record because, there were a couple instances in New York City which has used self-certification for decades of people who gamed the system or used it inappropriately. That makes headlines. But the reality is, when you look at it on a percentage basis, those kinds of programs actually have a good track record. And there are quite a few jurisdictions that have used them for very long periods of time. Some believe that you cannot streamline reviews that involve complex projects or streamline on an individual project basis, and that is also not true. And I'm going to show you some examples that are based on the use of streamlining, specifically targeting very complicated projects. Here you can scan a QR code for a document that was published by AI National a few years ago. It's called Permit Streamlining, a resource for AI components. It collects some examples. It talks about high-level strategies, much of which I'm going to talk about today. It has more myths busted, a couple pages, and it has sort of a step-by-step roadmap for AI components that you can use as kind of a guide as to how do you go about creating some momentum in your local community. Here are two additional QR codes. One is for a website that I created, gosh, it's probably been over a decade ago, called permitstreamline.com, where I was gathering examples from around the country, some of the core principles, and another one for the Streamline Institute, which is a nonprofit that manages the program I talked about that was launched in Northern California, which has probably been out there now almost 10 years. That site has also a lot of general material. It's my belief that in every place, every time, for every project type, there's room for improvement. And I think as architects, we probably tend to agree with that. When I started looking at sort of from an academic perspective, the different ways that you can streamline this process of reviewing plans that are precedent to issuing a permit, I came up with a couple of elements that had to shift in order to allow the streamlining. And when you analyze existing programs, you find that they are basic combinations of these basic concepts. One is shifting the flow chart. I worked in a jurisdiction where in one room they had an entire wall filled with a flow chart that showed what was involved in issuing a permit on a typical project. And in most jurisdictions, some don't even know what the flow chart looks like because the process evolves over time. Other ones have studied it and have a map. That's usually not public, but when you see things in a flow chart, you can start to see potentials for creating parallel review processes, eliminating overlap, simplification. Technology plays a role in permit streamlining. Digital review, which used to be relatively uncommon, now is used by virtually every jurisdiction. There are also programs being developed and have been developed. One that one of the people just called me yesterday that was marketing their program at the building officials annual conference was just 2 weeks ago in Hollywood, and I was there, and they had a booth. They're using AI to perform plan check. Now, are they ready to actually take over plan review for every type of project, for every set of circumstances? No, not based on the interview that I did with them, but it's coming. And technology is a big help, particularly when it comes to parallel processing, because when you have digital plans, you can distribute them to multiple departments all at the same time. You remember the old days where a paper set of plans had to be individually routed and it would collect written approvals and notes along the way. What a nightmare. You can shift resources. Process managers are relatively common in the larger jurisdictions. They are really important in order to bring together a central sort of overview of what's happening, what's going on, where are the roadblocks. There are also some jurisdictions that have other approaches like ombudsman, regional resource sharing, where jurisdictions that are slow can help take workload from jurisdictions that are busy. Peer review is a possibility and is used sometimes, particularly I've seen it used on innovative structural systems where the expertise to even do a review is not commonly available, so you have to bring in specialized expertise. You can shift the timeline, and I'm going to show you some very interesting examples of that. But I remember a day when it was common in my local area to issue field permits for residential remodels. You would literally be able, for some kinds of projects, to start construction, then apply for the permit, and the permit was issued by the field inspector at the first inspection. Now, I'm not aware of any jurisdictions that are still doing that, but you can start to visualize how, if you roadmap things, you can start to see how you can shift how the timeline works. You can shift roles and responsibilities. Self-certification is an interesting example of that, and I'm sure many on this call are interested in professional certification. You can shift the paradigm, and one of the ways to do that, I'm going to illustrate to you, is by tuning a set of documents to make it easier to review them. That's what the PASS program is based on. The most challenging and probably the most important method, though, is changing the culture. The culture on both sides of the counter, but from our perspective, it's the culture of the review process. And, sometimes that culture shift takes small moves over a long period of time, because sometimes things are so messed up that you actually have to change personnel, you have to change procedures, you have to have leadership that's interested in helping progress occur. And major culture shifts, if you have I was once asked to help Washington, D.C. was having really major challenges. In fact, you'll see a slide. And I was asked to bring a program to Washington, D.C. Based on the program I had developed in Northern California. When I found that they had actually had 3 billing officials in 3 years, I realized that bringing a new program to an environment that is unstable, that has some root problems that would lead to that kind of dynamic, is doomed to failure. You are not going to shift the culture by launching a new program. If you have a broken culture in a building department, that has to be addressed as a special approach. And in light of that, I thought it would be good to articulate, what does a high performance permit processing culture look like? What are the characteristics? And in fact, one of the things that I'm going to put on that, I'm going to post to the network that Sarah mentioned, that you all might find interesting, is a scorecard where you could actually evaluate the jurisdictions you work in and give them a numerical score between 0% or 10%, I think is the lowest you can get, all the way up to 100%, by thinking about their orientation to these basic elements. Let's look at these one at a time. Customer orientation. You don't think of the people who hire you when you're an architect. Most architects don't use the term customer. I do. I like that term because it implies that there's choice involved as part of the equation. Building departments don't think usually of architects as customers. If they did, and there was a choice that we could use about where to go, it would potentially change the sort of process. But definitely acting as if choice is part of the equation is important, because that brings respect, it brings courtesy, and it puts skin in the game for everyone. What does that look like when you talk about transparency? Well, here's an example from Charmek, which is a huge jurisdiction. And actually, this example comes from a jurisdiction where, guess what? An architect was a chief building official there, Jim Bartle, for decades. He developed some of the most innovative permit programs that I've seen in the country. He had an online dashboard, and you could see exactly where things were a bottleneck, because you would see these yellow flags that they're running behind. Here it's in the backflow. Who would think backflow devices would end up bottlenecking an entire city? Well, here's an example, and you can actually see it. And what we found is that when you put this information online for everyone to see, all of a sudden attention is put on those areas and things start to shift when it's transparent. Another example of transparency, and this comes from Charmek too. Charlotte is a city that you know about. Mecklenburg County, not everybody's heard of that, but it is one of the largest jurisdictions in the United States, because Mecklenburg County does plan review for all the surrounding cities, including Charlotte, and that's why it's a major jurisdiction. Here you can see a whole list of code interpretation documents. So when someone comes and sees that there's a part of the code that people are struggling with, to get on the same page between the design professionals, the engineers, contractors and the building department, you could request a code interpretation and there would be a written document produced. The way they put those all online is an example of transparency. So if I get a code interpretation and it's printed, it's available to everyone, everybody who can go to look at it. Another element that is typically not transparent, although in most locations by law it is available if you know what to request, are alternate means or appeals. All of you know that when you can't meet the code, that doesn't mean you can't proceed. Sometimes it means you have to find a way to create code equivalence. That's called an AMMR, alternate means and methods. Every one of those is a process of determining risk equivalency or code equivalency. In some jurisdictions, relatively few, this is from Portland, Oregon, they're published and they're online. Now, that doesn't create a legal precedent, but as an architect, when you can actually go and see how did somebody get to an added story? And I've seen examples of AMMRs where there is an additional story added beyond what the basic code requires. That seems like it's unthinkable, but it has been done, and it has been done in California. I know of a city where there was a consultant that developed a pattern that was considered acceptable. When those are published, that doesn't give you the right to do the same thing, but it does give you an idea of how was that path determined and navigated. So transparency is really an important element. And most of our jurisdictions, we have over 500 in California, they have some transparency, but usually it's very limited, very limited. And most of the things I showed you are not available on websites with California jurisdictions. A collaborative environment means people working together, and it's not just the people who are applying for permits working with the people who are reviewing plans, but all the other departments, the different jurisdictions, the contract partners, the people who are brought in to help when workloads get too big for them to manage it in-house. Consistency is a big issue. All of you probably have experienced situations where something you did last year, this year, in the hands of a different person is not acceptable, or you have a project even under construction, and then somebody else gets involved, and something that was approved by one person is all of a sudden questioned by another person, or this whole idea of internal consistency when plan check is completed and you have a field inspector who has a different idea what the code intends, that's a problem, and that shouldn't occur, but it does occur. Regional consistency, that means that if there's 80 jurisdictions in the LA area, the more they work the same and have similar code interpretations, it's really better for everyone. It's better for the code officials, it's better for the building industry, it's better for developers, it's certainly better for architects. And national consistency, we do use model codes, obviously in the United States, but we do have local variations. And in fact, I think we have far too many in California. We have no review of those local amendments for the actual narrow band that is permitted by law, which is differences based on geography and topology and climate. We have local jurisdictions that make changes that go far outside that realm, and there's no review, there's no vetting of those changes, and some of those changes are inconsistent with state level objectives. So finally, the big picture, and that is, how does this one part of the municipal and government process affect our whole environment, our whole city, our whole place where people live, where businesses are thriving, where we want to have revitalization. We're interested in equity and diversity and all those things that we might take on as part of what we're trying to accomplish. How does that big picture tie in to building permit processing? And it does matter. It does matter if a community sees permit processing. And that's one of the reasons that I have a concern when it becomes common that a jurisdiction contracts for their local building official, because I believe that the role of a building official, and this is a personal belief, not an AI California belief, I believe that role is really supposed to balance the good of the community with the good of business, with the good of development, and all those different factors. And if you're a contract employee of a third-party for-profit company, it's just hard for me to picture how that sort of big picture perspective is being implemented. When we do see big changes in a community, crisis can be a big driver. In my own community in Sacramento, this is going back 20 years. We had a series of building officials. We had one building official who had been there for decades, well-liked, well-respected, things ran smoothly. He retired. Then they got a couple of new people in short sequence. The first person just really blew out really fast. The second one had this attitude. They were literally going to, they were planning to put bulletproof glass in. That was a day when you had to submit paper plans. Things were so divisive. There was an actual city plan to put bulletproof glass, just like a bank, for the teller stations, so that because there was this distrust that someone could come in with a gun or some other thing and force their way into getting a building permit. That's how things had deteriorated until finally it was front page news that the largest local developer said, I will no longer do business in the city of Sacramento. That's when the community finally woke up and said, holy cow, how did things get this bad? This was on the front page of our local paper. So there was a launch of a series of efforts. One was called the Mayor's Commission on Development. I happened to serve on that. And one of the things that body did was create a list of recommendations, one of which was to establish something called the Development Oversight Commission. At the time when they did regional surveys, Sacramento came in dead last in the region for satisfaction from the people who used the building department, contractors, developers, architects, engineers, dead last. By the time the work of the Development Oversight Commission completed in about 5 years, we were number one. That was a dramatic change. We went from worst to first with a huge amount of effort. Unfortunately, once we reached that point, they disbanded the Development Oversight Commission because they thought, oh, job accomplished, and we're no longer first in the region. In fact, they don't even do surveys anymore. But many of you know that the disaster in Southern California has created a crisis. That's led to a major push to look at the potential for streamlining executive orders. Just on the 22nd, which is just over a week ago, there was a mayor determination that there will be self-certification in the city of Los Angeles. The details are still being worked out, but this is the list of her proclamation. It's going to take a license. There's going to be a test involved that you have to pass. You do have to maintain a certain level of liability insurance. The amount has not been set. You will be removed from the program at the discretion of the department if you make errors. There's still going to be inspections. There's going to be audits that are going to occur during the course of construction. And there's still the potential that zoning review might be included. But this is coming for sure in LA. Details to be worked out. There's a similar push in Hawaii because of that disaster to bring self-certification. And in fact, I interviewed a number of architects in Hawaii. But what's tempering that is I talked to an architect that does a lot of work in Lahaina. He is telling me that because of the way they have set up this, and there's an article that's attributing it to a particular plan review consultancy that was brought in to set up in a field office. They're turning around first round plan check in 2 weeks. That's what the architect told me that does all his work there in that community in 2 weeks. And then he's responding in 1 week. So he's getting a permit in 3 to 4 weeks. As far as he's concerned, things are going great. I went up to that consultancy that had a booth, like all the major consultancies in California had booths at the Calvo annual conference in Hollywood a week ago. I said, if you guys can go in there in Lahaina and set up this field office and issue permits and first round plan check and comments in 2 weeks, and you're doing it with a really modest staff on a reasonable budget, why can't we do that everywhere all the time? I just got to look like, there was no answer. But in theory, you know what the average time in that community was before the field office was set up? First round plan review, the average time was, I think it was 320 days. Went from 320 days to 14 days just by bringing in a new field office and a new team. And then places where, like, for example, New York City has been cited in some of the meetings in LA about self-certification because they probably among the longest using a system like that, many decades. This is a recent article from March about permitting. So when you implement a program That does not mean you're done. That does not mean all of a sudden everything's great and rosy. Some other examples of how AI components, AI Austin, they brought self-certification to residential plan review. Gosh, it's probably been 10 years now. That was the main driver behind this change was a small group of architects who gathered under the umbrella of AI Austin and were able to convince that change to happen. Sometimes permit streamlining occurs because of a desire of a community to compete with its neighboring communities. The whole area around Washington, D.C. is very competitive, where they're all the communities around there. Fairfax County competes with Montgomery County, and everybody's always looking for an edge. They launched a major program, not because of the developers deciding not to work there, because they felt they were losing their #1 position and they wanted it back. They wanted to be the go-to place for economic development. And some efforts are started based on encouraging better things to happen. This is an effort that was launched in LA about a decade ago to have the best buildings. Sometimes it's just about better business, like during the time when plan review was shifting from paper to electronic, Charmec launched a whole program. And here's an example of how an article written by the executive director, Mary Fitch, of AI Washington, D.C., ended up getting a lot of press and a lot of attention on what was then a really broken system, where the cultural disconnect in that department had reached a point where they'd hire someone new and within a few months they'd leave. Well, there's something seriously wrong with the culture when that keeps happening repeatedly. So where do you start if you are an architect interested in changing the permit process? Like anything, it starts with talking, but the talking can't be about just what happened on your project. I know every architect has a story, and later I scheduled this at 90 minutes because I'm not going to take up 90 minutes myself, but there's going to be a lot of time for discussion on here. But the talking has to be about the process. You are very unlikely to change the process to help your particular project that's in the system today. That's not how permit streamlining works. You can, however, take what you've learned from that core experience and use it to improve the process for projects that follow. That's really the perspective that has to be brought to the table when you get together and you start talking about shifting things. It has to be about the process, not about your experiences. You use your experiences to show examples, but your project in the current system is not going to be typically helped by changes, because changes can't happen quick enough. And it has to be about principles versus people and specific issues that you run into, particularly if there are individuals involved. You have to always present the issues as being about, what is really happening here. It's really like looking at the permit process as a design problem, using the same skills we use to solve complex design problems and looking at how permits are processed. You find common ground. We do share with all code officials a desire and a vision for a safe, functional, sustainable, and environmentally sound and beautiful built environment. No one's going to argue with that as a core objective. You build relationships, and everyone on this call has some kind of a relationship with the code officials that you work with. You have to survive in this business. And the other important thing that I like to point out is it's a journey, not a destination. I give you an example already of what happened in my own city of Sacramento. We went from dead last to #1. Now where are we? I don't know. We're not #1. We're not #1 anymore because the need is there. And so what I see happen is you create some kind of a platform where you can maintain a connection with the building department community, with the plan review professionals, and those that you have to interact with to get a permit. I'm going to give you some examples of how I've seen that unfold. One, in my own local AI chapter, was a program started, gosh, it's almost nearly 20 years ago now. We cover 17 counties in the Central Valley. And so we have a lot of code officials. This event was an opportunity to bring together code officials from across our region in an informal setting. But where things really got interesting is, and there was no PowerPoint, there was no formal presentations. It was just once a year to get together to talk about how are things going, what's on the horizon, where are some roadblocks, where are there conundrums, where are there disconnects, questions, answers. But the best part happened after that formal part where people are talking up in the front and people are raising their hand. Then everybody gathers and we have refreshments and you start to build personal relationships. Those events really helpful. And again, once a year. How hard is that? It's really easy to set up a program like this. Another one is what's called a civic engagement team or whatever. There's a lot of different names that you could come up with, but it's a group of architects who are all busy and don't have a lot of time to spend in meetings and committees and all that stuff. But again, if you can minimize the time you're spending as a committee and maximize the time when you're leveraging the power of collaboration, that you represent a community of architects, not just yourself, you can engage the local community. So here I already talked about AI Austin. It was just a handful of architects who devoted a modest amount of time and made major change. We also happen to do that in my own AI Central Valley chapter. There is another approach, and that is where you get multi-stakeholders working together. Architects are great leaders. You can bring together all the different interests, contractors, code officials, plan reviewers, engineers. Oh, my PowerPoint crashed. Let me restart. Get back to the same slide here. Sorry about that. Hopefully that won't happen again. You can all get together. So there's these two approaches that I want you to have in your mind. One approach is relatively informal. It's an AI component-led group. You can give it a variety of different names, but its purpose is to connect with the local, regional, or just one jurisdiction, or maybe a small number of jurisdictions, and start to brainstorm and work together to come up with ways to make everyone's lives easier, smoother, and better. The other is you go the political route and you get a group charter that has a civic mission. And those, I served on the Development Oversight Commission in my own community. There was a mayor's commission on development that preceded that. It could be a community development committee. There was an entity like that in Charmec. It was encouraged by Jim Bartle, the building official. It was an ongoing group that met, I don't remember. I don't think they met every month. They met maybe every other month. And it was a way to kind of monitor and provide feedback. Here's how things are going. And that would help with minor changes, but it also could make big changes happen. There's lots of different kinds of permit programs. Most of them are local. A very small number are project-based. There are also some regional and state level examples. I'm going to touch on a few of these. Some of the legislative moves, you're all aware that in the last few years, there has been a flurry of legislative activity, all intended to accelerate permit streamlining. The legislators pass a law that there's a 60-day time to review plans for an ADU. Anybody finding that ADUs are always processed within that time frame? And what are the implications if it's not met? There's a legislative mandate that said that every building department in California, starting, I think it was two legislative cycles ago, has to have a written list of requirements that determines what a complete submittal is. How many architects even know what that list looks like? Who is actually reviewing those to see if they're reasonable? Who is actually, there's all these actions at the state level. Some of them actually do help. Other ones don't seem to make much difference. And I think the missing link is architects being involved in helping shape what the actions are. So now we're going to talk about some of the different approaches. And one of the ways that helped me, because architects tend to be graphic oriented, right, is to look at how these different approaches play out when you look at the typical process where you used to have a set of construction documents, you submit them. There's what's called bin time. It's the old days when there used to be actual physical bins. where you're waiting for someone to look at things. That is always part of the process. A bin maybe is an electronic just queue, and then there's a plan check, and then there's comments, and then there's a bin time on our side where you're not able to jump on it within minutes. There's always some time. You update your CDs, then you go back, and then there's a bin time on the jurisdictional part. Then it goes back and forth until finally a permit's issued. Process improvement shortens that. It can do it by making every little of these part shorter. If you go to outside source review, it may change the name. So now it's a transfer, it's a handoff time, but it's still that same sort of back and forth. When you have cultural improvement, you can reduce the bin time, but the biggest thing you can reduce is the uncertainty as to what comments mean. When you can actually talk to the people who are parading the comments, reach an agreement with them, make sure that what you submit is going to satisfy them, it can just make a huge difference. This is an interesting example. I only saw it used in one place. That was Charmec. And again, I mentioned Jim Bartle, very creative guy, architect, and architect actually came out of private practice, ran that department for, gosh, I don't know, over 20 years, I'm sure. He's retired recently. But he came up with this idea called on schedule. For a large project in the Charmec region, you can make an appointment while you're in preliminary design for your plan check. How cool is that? Make an appointment, meaning there's no bin time, there's no wait time. So you make here it is, it's end of April. So I just got a project. I'm thinking, oh, based on my schedule, I'm gonna pick September 15th, and that's that I'm gonna go into plan check. They are ready for your plans on September 15th. What it gives the building official is the ability to understand how his workflow is going to vary in the future, because he can see these appointment commitments. And if you don't meet your timeline, though, September 15th, you're not ready, or you submit crap that can't make it past the intake triage, well, all of a sudden you got to go back to the front of the line, the same as if you didn't make the appointment. It was an esoteric program that I thought was brilliant. I've never seen it used anywhere else. There were people who used it once they got used to it. I thought it was cool. Professional certification. You just issue the permit as immediately you finish your CDs. You issue the permit, so it's whatever time you take before you fill out the necessary, and you start construction. Unfortunately, in most cases of professional certification, there is a plan check done by the jurisdiction. It occurs during the course of construction, and that is the weak link of any type of self or professional certification. That plan check can result in the need to actually go back and modify your drawings if something comes to light because they didn't look at it and they don't agree with it. In many places, you do not have any appeal process. The determination of a field inspector can be final. And that is why I want to talk about self-certification programs. And I don't know, in chat, how many people came to this because they were interested in self-certification, or I really prefer the term professional certification. Why? Because there's such a small difference phonetically between self-serving and self-certification. And when the public hears about self-certification, they immediately are thinking that is a self-serving program meant to benefit architects. That's why I prefer professional certification. And all these programs require you to be licensed. So I think that's a better term to use, just as a tip. Unfortunately, the prevailing term out there in the world is self-certification. There's two flavors of these programs. One is very simple. It's open to any licensed design professional that meets certain criteria, like, oh, you have to be licensed for 5 years, you have to have a certain level of insurance. Sometimes it's available only for small projects, and we're going to show you an example of a program like that. In California, the best known program like that is the one in Bellflower, small community in the LA area that launched this quietly a number of years ago, and it's actually, and you're going to hear from someone that's using that program. The bigger programs are complex. They involve criteria. There's usually tests. There's fees. There's a registry of people who have gone through the process and are approved. And their goal is to make sure that the people who are doing the certification, the design professionals, have a similar or the same skill set as a plan reviewer. They are instructed in how to interpret and apply the code the way a plan reviewer does. The biggest challenge with any kind of self-certification is what happens after construction starts. If there is an audit, and I've interviewed architects, for example, in the Phoenix area, there's a big program who have used that program that basically will never use it again. And I'll get to that as I come to that example. There could be some increase in liability and responsibility when you end up in the field. And some programs that are widely used, like the Phoenix program, has been in use for many years. It occurred because a large part by activity that was channeled through the local AIA component was a big driver in that, along with the business community. But it is only used for about 1 out of every 100 permits. It's a 1% program. In Charmeck, they had a very elaborate program that was used almost not at all. These are the actual numbers. That program in Phoenix was launched in 2010. In order to use that program, you have to take a 2-day class that costs $1,500. You have to renew your ability to use it by taking an additional training on a 3-year cycle. And it automatically involves an audit. And you can see how many projects fail when of the audits of 58 passed, 24% of the projects failed the audit. Now, what does that mean to you as a design professional if you failed an audit? The audit is a review of your project constructed in the field. And as I mentioned in an interview, I interviewed an architect that used it for a simple, it was like a facility in maybe it was in a park, a little restroom, kind of a break room. And he put on a water bottle filler and felt that it was equivalent to a drinking fountain. It was determined at the final inspection that it was not equivalent, and they had to add a drinking fountain. Well, ask yourself as an architect, how much when a project is completed would it cost to add a drinking fountain to that project? Is it a few $100s? No way. Is it tens of thousands of dollars? Possibly, it could be. If you, the architect, are the one responsible for needing to do that additional work, you're not going to go out there with your 2 hands and do the work. You're going to have to pay the contractor to do it. And if you're held responsible because you did not conform to code, 24% of the users fail their audit, their field inspection audit. Those are the automated audits. They also have random audits. That has a failure rate of 16%. I believe that explains, and you can use this program in Phoenix for really big projects, almost any size, even educational and institutional occupancies, but it's only used by 1%. It's 300 architects on the registry because it's competitive. In other words, if you're not on the registry and all the architects you compete with are, guess what? You better get on the registry because people are going to think, wait a minute. Let's talk now about a simpler program, the Bellwether or the Bellflower program. The only requirements are that you have to be licensed, you have to have a certain amount of insurance, and your customer, your architect client, has to submit a hold harmless letter. You need $1 million in insurance or not less than the project valuation. You also have to get clearance from other city departments. What's this like to use? Well, I'm going to turn it over now to Michael Bone, who's a colleague and chair of the AIA California's co-chair of the AIA's Housing Committee, very active. And he's used the program a number of times, and he's had some very positive experience. Michael, are you on?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, good to see you, Michael, and thank you for your time. I have used this program 3 different times. You can see 3 images on the slide. The first one was Steelcraft, which is on a 15,000 square foot site. It was about 3,500 square feet of various restaurants. Essentially, it's an outdoor urban eatery, and they were all in the shipping containers. And then there was a large wood structure that became the shading element for the development. The second project was actually for the city of Bellflower, and it was a warehouse building that they had purchased at the end of December in 2020, 2023, and then in 2024 in May we had the facility up and running. So, and that was furnished, and this was a homeless shelter for 50 beds. So an incredibly quick turnaround time. And then the third project that I was involved in was the adaptive reuse of an old JCPenney department store in downtown Bellflower that we converted as an adaptive reuse into creative office and ground floor retail. And so for us, we, as Michael had mentioned, we did have to sign a form. We had to make sure we had professional liability insurance. We had negotiated that $2 million would be needed. And this was done during the pandemic. And I should also mention too, the contractor has to self-certify as well. So, and then all of our consultants did as well. We had that tied into our contract. And look, I was just going to read how the city of Bellflower defines self-certification. I'm sorry, Michael.
I just wanted to ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
Because I already had a slide up that showed what the requirements are for the program.
Okay.
I know you actually checked about the impact on your E&O insurance. Could you explain what impact it had on your increase in liability? Was it insurable, the added responsibility you took on?
So our insurance carrier at the time and still is Assured Partners, and we have quite a bit of work in our office. We usually have about $30 to $35 million worth of work a year. So from their perspective, these three projects over time did not have any impact on our insurance. I think if all of our projects were self-certified, that would be a different issue, and they'd probably scrutinize the language of the forms that we had to sign with the cities much closer, but that never came up as a concern.
The big question in my mind, and you know I've already asked you this, how did you navigate this issue of plan review during the course of construction? Issues that a field inspector would say potentially gotcha. Now you need to tear something out that's already been built or whatever. Tell me about how that played out in the field in reality.
So in reality, once we got the permit, the contractor started demolition and site work. And at the same time, the inspectors within the city of Bellflower were combing through our drawings. And they were combing from start to finish, but then really focused on the next phase of the work. And so what was really great is they would ask us questions before we started the construction. So if there were gray areas, we would sit with them, the contractor would sit with us. And if there was an area that they didn't agree to our code interpretation, it would be worked out in the room, and the contractor would be there as well to see what the cost impact, if any, was. We had very few meetings like that. We had kickoff meetings all the time on all three projects. And then we had a few subsequent meetings, but over time, the comments or concerns or questions usually just came by email, and we were able to convince the inspectors that what we did was compliant. I will say that you need an inspector that's a collaborator, that there's this culture of working together and not trying to put someone else down or to say how great they were. I think that's the key cultural element that would concern me with certain other jurisdictions, is really just this idea of we're in this together and we're working together.
That's great. I really appreciate your taking the time. If you could stick around, I got a few more slides I'm gonna run through, and if you're available to answer particular questions, because I know there's a lot of interest in this. Now, earlier I had mentioned that there are streamlining programs that can be developed or used on one project that do not require a change in the city. And one of them, and they actually lend themselves to, and they probably only really work well on really large, really complicated projects. I call this rolling review. And what this is a plan check that starts before your plans are complete. Now, I know you're thinking, well, how would that work? You submit a half done set of plans to the city, and they're just going to return it saying, not enough information here to plan review, because you're not really seeing what I'm talking about. What you submit is, you start with first a pre-design meeting, and you set the pins up. and you have all the disciplines present at that meeting within the department. And the building official has to be okay with this. You have electrical, mechanical, plumbing, all the nut and bolt. And every time you submit, then after that, you submit a specific list of questions by discipline. In other words, when the electrical guy is looking at your plans, he's not looking at them generally like to do a plan review. He is trying to answer the 5 questions that you asked, like, can I put my main service entrance service gear inside the building because I don't have room? And here's how I'm going to handle that. Can I have only one of my 2 elevators on emergency backup? And here's my justification for that. For the building official, I had a question about what is the occupant load on the roof? If you look in the code, you know that occupant loads for roofs is in the code book, it says determined by the local code official. Are they going to assign it an assembly level, or are they going to assign it some lesser level, or what? Knowing that up front can be really great. Same thing with the height. I had a sloping site. There is no method in the code that articulates how you determine what the grade plane is. So if you show it at that early stage, you eliminate the possibility they're going to have a different idea. And each one of these sequential reviews was not informal. They were actually responding in writing, and it was an official plan check cycle. And it ended up eliminating a lot of headache. That can be done on one project at one time just by negotiating with the code official of a need for it. And again, I would say it was only appropriate on very complex, like trying to change an office building to an apartment building. Those projects can get into some pretty difficult. I was talking about historic conversions of a warehouse, and the other one an abandoned flour mill to housing. Another one that's really interesting is called, I call it the huddle. It's when you finish your CDs, you submit them, and they verify that these are complete. And the plan review occurs in 1 day, sometimes 2 days, where every discipline, all the engineers are present, the architect, everybody's in a room together, and you work through everything. And when you leave that meeting, you have a permit that is contingent on you amending your plans to meet what was required. This is a real program. It's costly. It's, for example, in Dallas, one of the places where I found this being used, even for really large projects, it costs up to $1,000 an hour because you're taking the plan reviewers, the really high-level senior people who can make decisions, and pulling them out of their normal workflow and putting them in a room. But wow, it's as fast as self-certification and way more certain. There's no transfer of risk or liability because your plans are being reviewed. They're just being reviewed in a day. Could that work on any size project? Well, it already does. There are communities. San Jose is one where you can do TI reviews over the counter and walk in and walk out with a permit, just like at that first slide. You get 30 days to update. So this is an outline of how it works. And there are other locations like Raleigh, North Carolina, Clark County, Nevada, San Jose, as I mentioned, that's doing a program like that. And finally, the PASS program. This is near and dear to my heart because I helped bring this to my local jurisdiction. That's a pre-qualified architectural submittal system is what it stands for. It's a collaborative process. It's really based on the same principles that are behind TSA pre-check. When you go through TSA pre-check, you cannot bring a bottle on. That's the same thing true on either line. They just assume you know better on the TSA pre-check line. It doesn't give you the right to bring anything on the plane that the other people can. You just, in theory, get through the process faster. It's not quite as fast as it used to be when it was new. Now I'm noticing that sometimes the pre-check line is longer than the regular line because so many people are using it. But the basic idea here is every set of plans is not the same. When you submit your plans as an architect, a professional, they're put in a mix with plans that are done by contractors. When it's residential, it can be done by anybody, a high school student, a homeowner. They are all treated the same. This actually acknowledges that they are not all the same. Some plans are far easier to review, take less time, and go through faster. We have had people report up to 70% time savings of the use of the PASS program. And as I said, this is a real program. It's in use. It's being used it was adopted by 19 different jurisdictions. One of the few things that jurisdictions, every code official is fiercely independent. 19 Northern California jurisdictions are using this. And if you were looking for a program that might be ported to another thing that's sort of off the shelf, ready to go, this is the only program I'm aware of that is already pre-vetted. It was developed in conjunction with the code official. So now we get to this slide where I'm going to leave this up, and here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to open it up. We're going to have a conversation. People are going to have a chance to ask questions, make comments, and probably just to keep it from getting too chaotic, we probably should have people raise their hands or something like that. And then while we're doing that conversation, Sarah's going to launch a survey, which I'd like you to take. How are you going to find, and the survey is about what are your experiences in the jurisdictions you work in. And then we're going to look at how that translates. We're going to post the results to that Basecamp site that Sarah mentioned. And we're hoping that on that Basecamp site, you will find kindred spirits who are finding the same issues and the same jurisdictions you have. And what I'm confident is, if you get a small group together, you can change those problem areas. You can shift that landscape. You can bring improvement. It doesn't take that much effort to do it. It doesn't happen automatically, but it doesn't take that much effort. So with that, if you could, maybe Sarah already launched a survey. I'm not sure I would see that on my end. Oh, here it is. It just popped up. So there's this poll, and while you're doing that, I'm opening it up now. Everybody probably who came to this has some specific example of permit challenges that you've experienced. So you can tell a story that you think would be interesting to others. You can share an idea. You can share a dilemma that you don't really see how it can be solved, or you can just, offer comments or questions. And if you want to put those in chat, feel free to do that. Oh, I see there's a lot of stuff in chat. I didn't have my window open.
Hi,
Sorry.
Mike.
Hi.
This is George from Redwood Empire Chapter, Northern California. I'm in the process with our chapter to actually implement one of these programs with the jurisdiction, either as a civic or a AIA coordinated effort to get people together to talk about the process that's going on in our county. One item that I've learned about is what the bottlenecks are involved with our jurisdiction, and they seem to have a pretty good handle on the architectural portion of the permitting process and the simple building. But once you get beyond the building, you look at civil and other aspects when you start looking at the dirt, that's when things get bogged down, no pun intended. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I've had people tell me that maybe you can streamline building permits, but you're never going to be able to streamline planning entitlements or the other departments that weigh in along the process. And as you all know, the building department acts as sort of this central focus point of all these flags that have to be released, all these clearances that have to come. It's the landscape department. It's the school fees. It's the public works. It's streets. It's it's complicated. Can those all be streamlined? Absolutely, they can. And the only way that there's going to be progress with that, though, is there has to be a meeting of the minds. There has to be an agreement that it's worth spending the time to try and improve things. And it has to be, those conversations have to be launched by the jurisdiction. So you have to start almost like think of a triangle. You have to start at the top with the building department where all those things come together, and then they have to bring together the other parties. And then there has to be a conversation. In a recent call with a group of people from Southern California that pretty frustrated with a program that it seemed to have political buy-in. I think it was called the Restamp program, where they were trying to get the complexity of a process where you get clearances department by department by department, each one of which typically asks for small changes. And then when you finished, you have now plans that have been modified in a variety of ways and potentially have to go back through the whole process again to get the clearances from every single department. So they were basically looking for a way to avoid having that restamp done mechanically. And they were getting some serious pushback. Some departments seemed like, yeah, we can do this. Other departments were saying, no way. Again, that's not meaning you're going to give up. That just means you've got a hurdle there, you got an obstacle, and then you focus in and you're going to have to solve those one at a time. But you're absolutely right that the issues are not, they're not just about building. In fact, sometimes the building permit review is the simplest part. Sometimes it's like I said, that dashboard from Charmac. You remember that example? That showed that backflow preventers were the major bottleneck in that whole community in terms of permit issuance. That was the beauty of seeing that online. That meant that everybody could see that. The city council people, the development community, the construction community, the architectural community, and pretty quickly, all of a sudden, everybody agrees, you know what? We got to find out what's going on over there in that department because they're hurting our community. They are creating major problems in our community, and that's what can happen. Transparency helps. I apologize if I didn't answer your question directly, but that's basically what I have to offer. Anybody else? Dustin, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. You got to unmute.
There you go. All right. Yeah. Thank you. It's Dushan.
Dushan.
So last year, I'm a building contractor. I do commercial buildings and large custom homes. But I ran into a problem last year. Actually, it was a long time ago. I was going to design build a project for a client. I'm also a real estate broker. And when I was brokering the purchase of the property, we had to submit a parcel map to cut the lot into to sell off the piece that my people wanted to buy and develop. And I ran into a snag with the county of Fresno, and they had one engineering or civil engineer on staff that was required to process all parcel maps. And he was taking an extremely long amount of time. And I started complaining, and it took us 3 years to get the parcel map approved. And it didn't matter what I said. I went to the head of the department. I asked for him to please put a meeting together, that I wanted to talk to everybody. I never got to the director. I got down to a couple sub managers, and it was all met with boilerplate responses. We're overworked, understaffed, and the reason I'm going to go back and talk to the director. I'm just going to cold call him, and I've been waiting for this seminar because I was hoping I was going to get a little more solution-based examples, but they need more people in there. And this engineer says he's the only one that can process these parcel maps. And I don't agree with that. Architectural offices, when you're designing, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you're designing a project, you have unlicensed draftsmen in there doing drafting for you, and you oversee their work. Isn't that true?
Well, let me respond before I answer that question. Let me respond to your general dilemma, because that's pretty typical when you start talking about permit streamlining. You get a lot of stories about individual issues. I can give you an example in my own area where a fire department review was holding up every project, including like a kitchen remodel, for 6 months because of their backlog. When you go in and you try and address those as an individual, one person, it's pretty easy to say, gee, sorry, come back, whatever. When you go into the community with the power of a group behind you, with the AI component, or you have an organizational entity chartered by the local jurisdiction to review and address permit issues when they come up, it gives you a whole different standing. You might not even be the one to present your case, because frankly, you're the worst one to make the argument, other than I'm me, I have a problem, I want you to solve my problem. That's a whole different thing than saying, I represent a group of design professionals, our community has an issue, You cite that as one example, but you need other examples too of the issue. And then you propose solutions, and you're working at a high level. You're not working with the people who are holding up your project. Your project, you cannot help at one project with permit streamlining unless you have the ability, like I mentioned, there are some programs like rolling review. That doesn't help you though. What you need is to be able to get the department to let go and bring in another professional. It's not going to be an unlicensed person in an architectural office going to take responsibility, though. That isn't going to work. You're going to need a way to address their concerns about accuracy, completeness. So it's going to need to be a licensed engineer who they admit has the ability, the respect, and the standing to take responsibility for that approval. And that would be the way I would approach that if I were working on it individually. But that's not a permit streamlining example. That's a project-based example. And remember when I talked about earlier, when you're trying to create programs or different culture in a department, it cannot be about one project and one example and one person. It has to be about processes, it has to be about systems, it has to be about approaches. So let's go to another. Megan, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for the webinar today. I found it really, really helpful, and it's finally giving me some hope. But I feel like it generally all of the jurisdictions that I work with, I work in Silicon Valley, so there's multiple jurisdictions. The cultural shift from the building department is really going to be like a key component to all of this change actually happening. And I'm wondering if you have any real world examples of ways that the culture within the building departments has been able to shift to come from like more of a place of yes, like I want to help and I want these things to be improved and my, the people that live here to live in better buildings.
I can give you a very specific example from my own community back when we had the Development Oversight Commission and things were completely broken. There was one key meeting that occurred that changed the dynamic considerably. It was a gathering that included all the plan reviewers, all the people from the design and engineering professions and contractors who had been involved. And it was a lunch meeting. It ended up costing a lot of money because to get everybody to take the time, and they broke down into tables. And at every table, they made sure there were people from the plan review perspective, as well as people from the industry perspective. And every table was assigned an opportunity to deal with a particular issue or dynamic and come up with suggestions. All of a sudden, everybody's brainstorming, and it created this dynamic that we're all in this together, and every opinion matters, including it doesn't matter whether you're a plan reviewer, you work digging ditches, whatever, whoever you are at this table, your voice is just as important every other voice on the table, and it really changed the dynamic. In the end, though, to really bring us to number one, I think those kind of changes can get you from, let's say we started at 10%, and by the time we reached that key meeting, we were at 30%, and there was a will and a desire to change. There were people who were in their way. There were people who had their arms crossed, who stern looked, who refused to participate in any conversations or do anything. There was a core group that literally had to be removed from the mix by the political leadership in order for there to be progress to get to number one. There was a small group. And in order to have the courage and the clarity to do that, which is pretty brutal, pretty hard, most people don't want to ever go there. You would have to already be at like 70%, and there's this consensus and this momentum, and then all of a sudden it's really clear. It's really clear that there are these 3 or 4 people out there that are just like throwing a monkey wrench every time there's an opportunity for progress. Then all of a sudden you can make that final rush to the finish line and get them out of the way. That's what I've observed. I hope that helps. Jennifer?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I'm Jennifer Kretschmer. I'm from AIA Silicon Valley, and I do a lot of projects in the city of San Jose, and quite a few clients ask me about this Best Prepared Designer program that the city of San Jose has done. So I looked into that, and they have a form. It's called a Design Professional Certification Statement that they want you to do on each and every project. I forwarded that to my insurance carrier. And my insurance carrier said, we're not going to let you sign that. So basically can't be in that program because of the attestment that my plans are correct and self-certifying. My particular insurance carrier didn't like that. Have you experienced that at all with the past program or any of the other programs that you've discussed with anyone coming back and saying that their insurance carrier was quite negative about these types of programs?
That's a great question. I appreciate your asking that, Jennifer. We have had instances where, as part of an effort, there was a form that the city wanted signed, and it would have language in there, indemnification, hold harmless language, that were typically like, no one can sign this that has insurance, and no one in their right mind would sign it. What we found gets traction is when you speak about a concern like that and you're an individual, it's really hard for the jurisdiction to change course because as far as they know, it's a one-off issue. And, if everybody can sign it except you, they may just say, hey, too bad you don't get to play here anymore. But if you come in representing an organization and you say with a group of people that we represent the 800 design professionals who do the work in this community, the professional work, this form is unacceptable. We have with us a person to speak to the insurability issue. It's not acceptable. It won't fly. Nobody can sign it. It doesn't accomplish what you want because it's just going to, then all of a sudden people listen and all of a sudden, well, what language would work? And, things get resolved. But when you're working as a single voice, that's the power of the AI component system. We have 22 components that cover the entire state, as diverse and as large as California is. Every one of those components has a stature that can be leveraged to make change happen that cannot be navigated as an individual. It just doesn't work. You just don't have enough. You're just not important enough. You don't have enough horsepower. And if there's enough interest, at some point, an issue becomes a state level issue, and AI California potentially could say, hey, we see now that this needs some attention at the state level. But frankly, we have to be really disciplined because we're a big state. We're a small group. But one of the beauties of this network is I will be looking at what's going on in this network, this permit streamline network. So if we're seeing the same issue pop up in multiple places and multiple scales, that's when all of a sudden it's like, hey, this is a state level issue that needs some attention. So we're hoping that you will post those to the network as they come up. But in your local component, if you can find one or two other people, and again, I'm not talking about a standing meeting where it's going to burn up a lot of time and energy. We're all busy people. We're not looking for committees to join, but you got to leverage that connectivity so that a voice is not yours. And in fact, if you're really sharp, if it's a problem on your project, you're not the one speaking. It's someone else speaking and using yours as an example along with two or three others because you've already been pegged as, oh, you have an issue. So it's better if you then back up and let someone else be standing at the front of the line. Adam.
Hey there, Michael. Yeah, thank you for putting this on. I've been trying to think of which anecdote here of my list of anecdotes you'd like me to talk about. Jennifer touched on something good. I'm sure me and Megan will back her up in that meeting. And the city of San Jose have developer roundtable meetings with developers every Thursday. So Jennifer, maybe me, you, and Megan need to go in there and talk about issues other than the ones represented by land use consultants and lawyers and hundreds of units, which are also somewhat impossible to do, right? Most of the building in California right now is happening with single family homes or ADUs that are usually single story and small and not very complex, yet they're very complex in nature when having to deal with Northern California plan check processes. I'm sorry, I don't know a lot about the Southern California processes, but I hear it's not as cumbersome yet. I feel like it will be soon. But so I work in San Jose area primarily and around the Bay Area, but we have done work all over Northern California, Napa, Sonoma County ADU program. I think Michael, you might have been involved with, and over 65 different jurisdictions. We've got permits over the last 5 years. They're all bad. They're all nuanced, and none of them run well. And even if I've got something pre-approved in multiple jurisdictions, that doesn't mean I'm not going to get more comments and different comments from the next one. And that's hard for us as licensed design professionals. I think my other thing about that and what that is best prepared design program and culture is when you say licensed design professional, the building code says that. So I think that's what other people repeat. But I believe there's only 3 licensed design professionals when you want to talk about that program and in the building code, and maybe there's a couple others, but for our work, it's a architect, it's a civil engineer, or it's a structural engineer. Maybe there's landscape architect needed for landscape architectural work. You know, but these programs require unlicensed, non-professional individuals to sign documents in part of a program where this literal San Jose program says unlicensed design professional. And that's an oxymoron when you refer to the code, because there is not any kind of licensure or professionalism requirement of those people doing those drawings. And I think a big problem is you have a lot of people in California submitting for building permits. They're allowed to, and they're from wherever across the world, able to put drawing packages together, whether they're complete or 30% or 95%. It's unknown to the consumer. And I think that's a detriment to the welfare of the consumer doing these projects. Right.
Let me just stop you right there, Adam, because you've already covered about a half dozen topics. Let me respond to a few of those. When you talk about inconsistency in a region between departments, building departments, that's a simple program like that code conversation program I mentioned, where you're bringing code officials together once a year and they meet each other and they have an opportunity to see design professionals. And they,
right. We listened to the slides. Like, is there a subcommittee for this thing that the AIA is putting together to do this?
It's a simple program. You literally just, it doesn't need a committee. It doesn't, I've run it just as an individual. I didn't have a committee. I just would invite, I picked 6 code officials based on either their size or their impact, and invited them to an event. I got the local component to give me a space. We got some donations.
Yeah, I think it's more systemic, I think, than that, because most of the people aren't even working in the department and they're at home at their desk, may or may not be actually
You don't
doing a
bring
lot of
in
work. So
reviewers. You just bring in the people who lead the department. And in fact, I limited to not even, I wouldn't.
yeah, most of those department people too aren't in the office part of the time, from what I've experienced by trying to show up and ask questions.
You're misunderstanding what I'm saying, Adam.
No, I totally get it.
Okay.
I've tried to do it, but we are just the next person.
Different things. You have not tried to put a code conversation event together. It's one event. You schedule it months out. On November 7th, you're inviting these 8 code officials, just the top.
I wasn't trying to argue with you, Mike. I was just asking if there's a group here. It seems like we have a group here that could help make systemic changes to the culture of the process.
We do. That Basecamp site is where I'd like you to put your ideas, your suggestions, your conundrums. I want you to put posts on there, and then look for kindred spirit who will be in your area, where you can set up some connection. You don't even have to meet in person. You can just exchange information and put a plan together for how you're going to start to tackle this. It has to be as a group. Going in there as an individual is not going to make a big impact unless you're able to move mountains. And just to move on, because we've already spent a lot of time, we've only got time for maybe 2 more questions. Stephanie? Stephanie Reich.
Hi there. Thank you for taking my question. this may have been covered before I joined, so I'll try to be succinct. I'm Stephanie Reich. I am the Design and Historic Preservation Planner for the City of Santa Monica, also known as the Urban Designer for the city. And I'm an architect active in AIA LA. Our city is looking at professional certification for a small group of projects right now. I've done a little bit of research talking to folks who have experience with the city of Santa Monica. It's a very different city than, say, city of Bellflower. So I appreciate Michael putting that guide in the chat. But one of the things that I've heard from the architects I've talked to is an idea to have a go through a single review and then have a self-certification, so that there's a set of comments that would be received by all of the departments, and then they could sign off. I don't know if that would be better for insurance companies. So this is a question for you, Michael, and also I'm seeing Megan nod that's a good idea, because a lot of architects are actually uncomfortable signing off on single family residences or TIs. And we've had some pretty egregious mistakes in those areas. So I just wanted to put that question out to you and also to the attendees. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Stephanie. Self-certification has a buzz and it has a draw. Architects are drawn to that like moths to a lamp in a summer evening. But it's not all that it's cut out to be. And I showed you examples of programs that are just as fast, just as effective, and because they bring some conundrums to the table. And many of these, the codes and the standards are all just words, and words can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. Someone can read it and think they know exactly what's being referenced and find out there's a different opinion on the other side of the counter. And that's a problem. You talk about egregious errors. Sometimes errors occur because there's a misunderstanding. Sometimes because people are busy enough, they think, they're used to relying on others to pick up the details later. Some people use plan check as a quality control process.
Right. I've heard that too.
Code officials tell me that some of the stuff they get is just unbelievable. That's the power of a program like the PASS program I mentioned, where the standard is the organization and content of the drawings, period. There is no self-certification. There's no signing a letter. There's no testifying to anything. You're trained as to what is a complete set of documents look like when you take, and there's a test, and when you pass the test, now you can say these plans comply with the PASS standard, and they're supposed to be reviewed expeditiously by the jurisdiction because they're tuned for PASS plan review. That's the power of that program. It doesn't require any roles and responsibilities. So again, sometimes like in LA, the drive for self-certification is this massive push. We are going to get self-certification.
Right.
My gosh, they're successful. But if in the end it only works for 1% of the projects, because architects look at it and go, oh my God, this requires me to sign my life away, or I don't really feel comfortable being responsible that a $200 problem, when it's already built, could cost $20,000 to fix, and I'm going to have to pay for that. That's pretty scary for a lot of architects.
Yeah, and I guess, Michael, the other thing that, as I'm on the city side, one of the things that I am concerned about is that folks who are least qualified to self-certify would be most anxious to self-certify.
That can happen. In fact, I mentioned that New York City, which has had a self-certification program in place for many decades, there have been times when there's someone on the front page with some major problem, maybe even uncorrectable problem that came out of the use of that program. They pull those people off the approved list, but the owner of the property is stuck with this, really bad situation. It gets a lot of press. Those things do happen. They're quite rare. But again, I don't think professional certification is the only answer to making things quicker and more. I can tell you that in Hawaii, for example, Hawaii was the poster child in the United States for permit processing nightmares. Every island has huge backlogs. They are always, as I said, in Lahaina, the standard review time up until recently was over 300 days for a residential remodel or new home. It's just, now they're doing them in 2 weeks. The whole press to do self-certification. And so the community of design professionals in Hawaii felt like self-certification, that is the only way through this. That's what we have to have. Well, all of a sudden, when I talk to them, and I talk to this architect who's doing a lot of work in Lahaina, it's like he's not on that bandwagon anymore. He's getting a review in 2 weeks. As far as he's concerned, that's pretty good.
Right.
It could
Okay.
be faster, but is it worth upturning? Plus, you have all the other implications of self-certification. You've got potential union interests who are going to feel threatened. You have people who make their living doing plan review who may feel like, hey, you're taking my job away. You have all these ripple effects. So again, I think, as Michael Bone illustrated, it can work. It can be great. It can be a win-win. Is it the only solution? Is it the end all be all? Is it what you need in your local community? I don't know. You better ask that question though before you took a huge amount of effort and then find out that no one will be willing to use it because it carries with it such heavy.
Right.
I told you that architect I interviewed in Phoenix, he was a big fan of it until all of a sudden he got stuck with a $20,000 cost and a potential black mark on his record over something so small.
Oh, wow.
Difference of opinion. Not everybody wants to be in that boat. And again, it's different if you think about, oh, that's never going to happen to me. Those people are so arrogant that they think they can avoid any misunderstanding or any error. That's not how human beings are wired. We do make errors. The standard of care of an architect is not to be error-free. It's to meet the standard of your.
Can I ask just one more follow-up question,
Sure.
please? One of the things that I learned as part of this discussion is that our building and safety department spends about 30% of its time on interior TI plan checks, non-structural plan checks. So would there be less of a concern if we just said, okay, you can self-certify all you want on interior non-structural TIs?
And again, I would say, my understanding is in San Jose, you can get an over-the-counter review for an interior TI. If you bring in a crappy set of plans, though, they're just going to send you packing. They're not going to figure out everything for you. So if someone, unfortunately, when you get into a practice area that does not require a license, you don't have a lot at stake, anybody can do it. You're going to get a huge variation, and that's the beauty of the PASS program. It pre-qualifies these plans. Now, a person is saying they've reviewed them, they do meet these standards. There are standards. There's like a 4 hours of classes that are involved in what is a PASS compliant set of plans. So just to say you're going to open the floodgates and let everyone through it, you're going to have
so I apologize because I had another meeting that ran over. So that's a pre-qualification for applicants that they take a class, they take a test, and they're pre-qualified to self-certify.
And our program,
or pre-qualified for like same-day plan check or expedited plan check.
Right. And it gets a very expedited plan check, which, again, some communities do that for anybody. But if you are going to try and do it on a set of plans that's incomplete, poorly organized, done by someone who doesn't really understand what's needed, that's a lose-lose situation. Now you're taking public money and using it to supplement what should have been spent on having a professional do the plans. So, again, involving the local AI component can help get clarity on what are we trying to do here? How can we actually do this so it's a win-win? So we all benefit and we're not inadvertently creating a whole new set of problems. And I see we are over time now. I really appreciate everybody contributing. I hope you will all, with an interest in this topic, join this Basecamp group. We found that Basecamp can work wonderfully. It may not look like much initially, but if you looked at what we've done in 3 years with the ADU technical network, We now have a platform where people actually go there, they find solutions to problems, they communicate with others that are in the same pickle. It becomes a self-regulating environment where you find, you know, kindred spirits and what are people doing to solve a problem, and it works. We can't do that at AI California for every community, every 500 of the 500 jurisdictions. It's just not humanly possible. But we can support an environment where the common issues will bubble up, and the ones that we feel like, okay, now that's a state level issue that we need to start putting some attention on, we can actually offer suggestions when we see issues where people are struggling with and just need a nudge in the right direction, or here's some resources, or here's a suggestion. You know, so that Basecamp site is really what we're hoping is going to be an ongoing platform to help make permitting better in California for everyone.
Sarah, is there a link to the Basecamp site in the chat?
You have to actually ask to be added. We can't
Okay,
assume. So
great.
you can fill out that poll that's still open.
Sorry. So I did close the poll just because we are over time, but for everyone on the call, thank you again for being here. I will be sending a follow-up email to everyone this afternoon. I will clearly state, if you please respond to that email with your interest in being added to that Basecamp, we'll be sure to add you as quickly as we can so we can start getting some of these conversations going. There's a couple posts in there from Mike and I already to welcome folks to the Basecamp. So just keep an eye out for that follow-up email, which you should be receiving soon.
Thank you all for taking the time. Great to meet you. And I hope to be able to have continuing conversations with everyone on the Basecamp site. Take care now.